This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, now you're on, go.
Thanks, Bill. So as usual, Bill's given us a script, which we have to read through. Thank you, Bill. Keeps us on task. So welcome to the AAIE Grape Roundtable. We go live for the next 2 hours. Our roundtable will be running similar as it has in the past, only online. I would like to introduce our facilitators. My name is Chris Storm. I'm with Vino Farms. We've also got David Langone, and I think he's with Constellation. Is that still correct?
No longer current, unfortunately.
Okay, and then Larry Whitted, independent PCA in the Lodi Delta area. So AIE Executive Director Bill, who's still with us, is running roughshod all over us and will keep an eye out for any glitches that may occur. We need to do some housekeeping beforehand, and it looks like most of you are being really good about muting yourself, so I appreciate that. So this session is being recorded for further use. It will be on the website, along with our other virtual video presentations through December. Depending on how many participants will be joining, we'll determine if we will allow you guys to talk via mic or if we'll just use the little chat box. Now look in your upper right-hand corner there, the little bubble, the word bubble, like you'd see in a cartoon. That's where you would want to click to write in a comment or a question. Let's see. So I ask that all of you mute yourselves, including you, John Holmquist. Thank you. And if it's out of hand, we have the ability to mute you. Okay. Hopefully we won't have to do that. Let's see. Let me get back on task here. So as you answer or ask questions in that text box up there or in the chat box, one of us will read through those questions, comments, so that everybody can understand what's being asked. We'll try to curate the questions so that we stay on topic as best as possible, but you know how these things go, they sort of wander. We are supposed to be receiving CE hours, and we ask that we keep the discussion on pest management to avoid nutrition and fertilizer comments. Same goes for irrigation, unless any of those topics has something directly to do with pest management. For example, mites and moisture or water stress creating a mite flare. We're also very honored to have DPR in the virtual room. They'll be listening throughout the 2 hours, and DPR was interested in this session due to the fact that there are so few live sessions like this. Most are just pre-recorded. Another item prior to starting will be a disclaimer. This is a roundtable and a frank discussion between professionals, and being made by those here participating. So sharing this information and experiences hopefully will increase the rest of our professional careers and knowledge base. None of this discussion in this roundtable is intended to be used as a recommendation to anyone listening or participating. It is only based on their own opinion and not AAIE's. Furthermore, AAIE encourages those who are not licensed PCAs to seek one of us out, especially those in this room, for pest management advice decisions on your ranch or ranches. AAIE does not endorse or recommend the use of any products discussed today. All comments are the opinion of the participants. Okay, so for those of you who are just here with your volume turned way down, this is the part you want to pay attention to. There will be a small quiz at the end of the roundtable. This proves that you were here and that you listened. We'll explain how to access this quiz sort of right there at the end. Bill will jump on and kind of give us a walkthrough of what to do. You need to pass this quiz by 70%. If you come in late or have to leave early, you will still have to take the quiz for your hours, but you will only be credited for those hours that you are online. Also, there are 2 hours, after the 2 hours are up, and you want to keep going, the discussion to continue, we will keep this room open until discussion dies down, but the recording will stop after after 2 hours. Please remember that we are all volunteers and have not done this type of meeting in the past. We're all probably getting used to it at this point, though. And if there are any glitches, blame it on Bill, although he'll be working in the background to keep those things from happening. So one of the things we wanted to keep sort of this group on task is to limit the discussion to any one topic to no more than 15 minutes. Larry is going to be gracious enough to be our moderator in that respect, and I'm hoping between Dave and myself and Larry, we can keep the discussion moving, and then everybody else participating, and not miss any one topic. So with that, looks like we've got 31 participants, so still pretty good participation. There were, Dave and I, Larry kind of jumped on at the last minute. This is Max, unfortunately, was not supposed to be here. Max cannot be here. We kind of ran through a number of topics, and I think the one that is interesting to me right off, mainly because the discussion yesterday in the tree roundtable was about mites. I thought we'd start off with sort of mite activity and experience that people had last year. Maybe Dave, you can start off because your experience, I think, is a lot different from what at least Dan Myers and I who work together experienced. So Dave, why don't you start this discussion off?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the startup and the housekeeping. I guess if there's any questions on that, we can go back to it. But yeah, for the spider mites, yeah, now in the Lodi area. So back in the Lodi area after a little brief detour out to Paso and the North Coast. So good to be back in the Lodi area, North Valley. Some of the spider mite patterns that I was noticing are on the typical susceptible varieties. So Chardonnay would be the primary one, and then also Zinfandel. And probably the most concerning from my perspective would be the Petit Verdot, where it's a late season red that's carrying a lot of crop, grower friendly, but terribly late, even after Cabernet. So waiting around for it. Canopies don't develop all that well. It shows a lot of nutrient limitation as far as phosphorus and potassium. So that coupled with the spider mites that were showing up, in my opinion, from what I was seeing earlier than usual, especially by species, pretty concerned about the spider mite level infestation there. And we ended up treating for that in that particular field that I was thinking of up by Clay Station, Twin Cities area, and Laguna out to the east side, sort of towards the Rancho Seco power plant, if you will, out that direction to the east side. So that was my experience with mites this year. We treated because of this, yes, it's a grower preference, but in order to keep costs down, the primary treatment tool was, for better or worse, abamectin, Agrimec, the exact formulation, can't remember exactly what we used, but Agrimec, abamectin, and that was 2 different applications over the season. And we saw what's that? Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Do you know what species they were?
Yes, early on we had a little bit of the 2-spotted. I guess the didn't exactly key it out or identify by microscope which species, but the 2-spotted was showing up early in the season, and then kind of as we went on, the Pacific spider mites showed up pretty early. I think it was early July, maybe late June, that Pacific was already showing up in the Petit Verdot. So those are at least the 2 species I was noticing.
Yeah, it's interesting you had that experience because I would say this was one of, at least for the vineyards that I manage and that Dan Myers managed, who's also on the call, was one of the lowest mite treatment years. And I think partly that was because we had a fairly cool spring and summer up until about August or say late July. It was relatively mild, and our area, and that didn't seem to flare the mites nearly as much. But Larry, you're kind of in this area. Did you have that same experience?
Yes, I would say I have two different strategies because I work in Lodi and I work in Clarksburg. In Clarksburg, the abamectin is fine and it's cheap, and that's typically what we do. In fact, I gave a talk in March and I asked in Clarksburg if anyone had ever seen Pacific mite in Clarksburg, and no one had. So it seems to be all Willamette over there. In Lodi, we get Pacific mite also, which seems to me the abamectin isn't really good enough for the Pacific mite.
Martin here asks, are we seeing any mite resistance in this area? And I personally have not. We're treating, and I'm talking about between Sonoma County, Napa County, and the 4 counties around Lodi and the Clarksburg area, probably less than 10% of our blocks in a given year. And we're rotating between Onager, Zeal, Malta, and those seem to be doing a really good job for us for our thresholds, and I like those products because they're fairly benign on beneficials. So I have not seen any breakdown in material. Martin, maybe you could, do you have any experience there?
No, I haven't seen resistance in the fields that I look at, but I do have a friend over in Lodi who said he sprayed like 3 times with 3 different materials. So I'm assuming that's because of resistance.
I would assume that's because he killed off the beneficials.
Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, I've always been kind of reluctant to use abamectin because I've had some bad resurgence experiences in almonds. But a few years ago, because of the cost, the grower wanted to use it for some Pacific mites. And I was afraid it would kill the 6-spot thrips, but as it turned out, it did a good job on the Pacific mite, and I continued to find the 6-spot after the spray, and they cleaned up whatever was left over from the abamectin. I'm still a little reluctant to use it, but it's not as bad as I thought.
I like letting the Willamette mites, those early season sort of spring mites, hang out, and I won't treat for them generally, and unless it's a really bad situation. But let them kind of build up so that your predator population can build up, either the thrips or, you know, predatory mites and other generalist predators. Let them build up so that when the Pacific mite kind of start kicking in the midsummer, you sort of have a population of low damage mites, which are the Willamette mites, feeding the predators that can then consume the high damage mites, the Pacific mites. And that's maybe why we're only treating 10% of our acres. And in many of those situations, we're treating because it's winery requests, not because there's a threshold. I guess that's a threshold, but you know, it's not because they're not going to ripen.
That's a pretty consistent theme. I think the abamectin was definitely affecting our population of predatory mites. I didn't see that many, especially early in the season, towards the end of May and June. So definitely knocking down those populations. John, do you have a comment here? I don't know if I can unmute you. I don't think I have that privilege here. Hold on one second.
No, I can unmute myself. And, you know, gentlemen and ladies, you know, you're all talking about using chemical controls. Has anybody tried any releases of predatory mites? I'm doing some in an organic Fiesta block and having pretty damn good results. Anyway.
I had an organic grower in Lodi release 6-spotted thrips this year, and I haven't had anybody releasing predatory mites, but I've had a couple of growers release 6-spotted thrips.
Might be a little bit more
John,
difficult when you're.
I think when you're seeing resistance and problems, that maybe one should try them. We hired a guy from Salinas with a drone and flew them on for the last 2 years. Anyway, very interesting way to do a release.
Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, I've used 6-spot thrips before, and at the rate that I put them out, they were very slow. It took like a month and a half before I could even tell they were working. And it's hard to distinguish between what you put out and what comes in naturally. However, I was pretty well convinced that it eventually, the releases did help. I also know a grower, not my client, but I know a grower who puts out a lot of predatory mites, very high numbers, and if it's targeted right, it seems to do a good job too. So they're both possible.
So we're kind of running up on our 15-minute time limit on mites. One thing that I will say, and this maybe can be a segue into the next topic. I'll agree with you, John. We did have a block many years ago that just every year we had to spray with mites, and I was getting sick of the treadmill. So we applied predatory mites. I think we actually got them from Max. I don't know. I think they were from Max, somebody. And it sort of, it wasn't something I could notice that year, but we have probably in the years since then sprayed it 1 out of every 5 years. And I'm not saying that's the only reason it's that we've had success there. I think we've got our irrigation and nutrition sort of lined up, but perhaps that was beneficial. And I do like those Parabug guys. We use them for releasing. We have used them for releasing the Cryptolemus for amoeba control. So since we are up against our 15-minute self-imposed time limit, and we're talking about beneficial releases, why don't we talk about some organic issues this year, and spend until about 2:30 talking about organics if it lasts that long. So what are people doing for leafhoppers? John, you have a suggestion?
Well, we're having issues with leafhoppers in this vineyard. The grower wants to try lacewings, but lacewings are a generalist. I've seen them work in another small 20-acre patch of organic raisins. So we're probably going to try them next year. The other thing that I'm suggesting is a midnight application of soap. Every other row. This is an overhead block, and so the crop is in alternate rows. But so running a spray rig and getting any kind of coverage is not very good. So yeah, I understand the leafhopper issue.
Sorry, I'm kicking my dog out of the room.
We're getting a couple of comments in the chat, Chris, about the organic leafhopper control. Somebody put garlic oil, and Monty put Pyganic.
Yeah, the Pyganic thing. I mean, Pyganic's kind of, I get it. It wipes everything else out. So I'm willing to use Pyganic, and Dan can maybe back me up on this late in the season, before harvest as a knockdown so that they're not flying into people's noses. But early season, I just am leery about using it. You see mite flares, later on. Is that others' experience? Devin, looks like you've got your mic on. Do you have experience there?
Yeah, I like the Pyganic with I forget the product. It starts with an O and it's made out of orange peels. It's an adjuvant. And if you use them together at just the right timing, just before they start turning into adults in June, and you have to be prepared by using Oraboost. That's the one. So Pyganic and Oraboost at that, when the first nymphal generation is mature, but not quite adults or just a few adults, you can do a pretty good job and you get a good start. Also, when the vineyards that have the worst problems are the ones that have a lot of hoppers coming in from the weeds or nearby in the spring. So if you had a bad vineyard, you should look around, see what weeds there are. I think like fiddleneck and some of these things have a lot of overwintering hoppers, and to change the what's the understory can sometimes help with hoppers. I think everybody's experienced that. They come from somewhere, so they don't overwinter on the grapevines.
Okay. Anybody have any other suggestions? Marty, maybe anything up there in
I have an opinion about the hopper population is far more severe down south than it is up in the north there. I mean, there's no comparison from the world I look at, but tell me if I'm wrong.
I think everything's tougher where you are, Monty.
Well, we don't usually haven't had leaf hopper problems in a long time in the conventional vineyards, mainly because of all the mealybug stuff we're putting through the drip. But in the organic vineyards, yeah, last year was pretty heavy. So we'll try to get an oil on in there just to kind of knock it back when we do a mildew spray. And that seems to knock it down enough.
Yeah, somebody else mentioned oils for mites early season, for mildew and mites early season, and we have tried that, and it's been fairly successful. I've kind of gotten away from that because I like to use micronized sulfur for mildew. Let's see. So I think why don't we transition to maybe our favorite topic in organic of how do you deal with weeds? If you can't use a machine, what are you guys using out there? Weed Slayer doesn't seem to be available anymore. No comments?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry, am I not coming through clearly? I'm just curious if with the unavailability of Weed Slayer and some vineyards that aren't conducive to mechanical weed reduction, what are people doing in organic situations for weeds?
Have you tried suppress, Chris?
Yeah, I would call it maybe not suppress, but look sternly at the weed and hope that it runs away. It doesn't work very well.
We generally use a Scoville number 9.
Say that again?
I say we generally use a Scoville number 9.
Is that a brand of shovel?
No, it's a brand of hoe.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as mechanization in a conventional block, we did use some of our river bottom ground where it's sandier. We had an opportunity to use a Clemens weed knife for the radius equipment, which worked well. I'm pretty happy with the control we got from that.
Yeah, we've got a winery that's basically requiring us to get away from weed sprays, and it's conventional, and so we're going to be trying the Clemens weed knife, and we also looked at the Planck, which both of them pretty much the same thing with that radial tine or head on the top. It's just gonna, we're gonna burn a lot more diesel and maybe more compaction and those issues, but they did look like they did a good job.
The Clemens
Also demoed
works-
the Planck cultivator in Napa, kind of in the middle of the Napa Valley, and that was the Planck ID David cultivator. I think they ship it in and sell it through Planck. And that had kind of the the turning tine on the side of it with the clemens included, the combo, and that was really great as far as cultivation under the vine. Really close kickback, and it had both sides of the vine covered well. Just have to find a Yanmar or some kind of New Holland TK crawler to put it on, so it's not too much, not pressing too hard on the soil surface.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So
I
nothing.
agree.
Go ahead, Larry. Is that
Well,
you?
this is Prudy. This is
Oh, Prudy.
But anyway, that's okay. I'm in Santa Cruz, and we use the Clemens. I can't tell you how many people jump on board with the Clemens and are unhappy with it, because that knife really works if you've got super level. If you've got a really level site, you're fine, and light soil. But once you get any kind of slope or high weeds, it just doesn't make it happen, because the knife has to be able to slide under the root zone of the weed to make it work. I've seen more people be frustrated with it. It works great if you have super sandy soil that's really level, but any kind of heavy soil or slope or terrace is really challenging. And I agree, the Palanque is great. I think you really want to look for there's a few, I think it's a Garramundi or Giraldi that is on a 3-point. Ease of being able to hook it up and take it off is super helpful. The guys don't like looking back because most of these have that feature in and out of the vines, but you have to be able to see. You want to be able to watch it. So one of my guys cleverly put a piece of PVC pipe on the front of the tractor at the same width of where the weed would extend to. So it helped him stay on track without having to constantly turn around once he got confident using the machine. So there are some really great machines there, but I just urge people to either commit to something that's always on their tractor, so they're not, if it's one of those tractor mounted, and the rotary is really nice because it also helps you incorporate amendments. The knife would be my last choice. I really would, unless you have just perfect conditions.
That's thanks for the comment, Prudy. So which of those, it sounded like that Garramundi or that would be your preference for hillsides?
I liked it because it is on a 3-point. It's radical. It really tears up the soil. It's almost too aggressive. You have to be careful, but you can adjust it. And then you have to have top and tilt. If you are on a terrace or a hillside, your tractor has to have top and tilt to be able to manage the hydraulics. But yeah, that one or the Palanque both have a lot more versatility than the knife. There's another one that starts with a Rinaldi, I think that is. There's another one. I can get the names of these that works on smaller tractors, and that's another big plus. But the ones I've liked the best are rotary or work like a rototiller, have a little head on it, and our 3-point, it really makes a difference.
Is that a front 3-point mounted or rear 3-point on the mounting for that?
It's a rear 3-point. It would be great to have front, but again, a lot of the tractors, we just don't have that kind of flexibility. And the other key with using mechanization is the willingness to go in more than once. A lot of times people just want this one and done. They have this one and done mentality, and we've just been way more successful at being willing to go in and then go in again and let the weeds get big again, because the whole deal is being able to go in early and kind of often, as long as the soil's dry enough to be able to get in, and not have this idea of, let the weeds get so big and then you only have to deal with them once. I just think that's a misguided thinking. I think you have to be willing to go in more than once.
I'm curious about your timing this time of year. Do you go in before the rains, or do you try and get in there, between storms sometime during the winter, or do you just wait till spring and then do 2 or 3 monthly for 2 or 3 months afterwards?
Right. The first time we go in is always the most challenging because of having to work around the rains. If we get that long February period where it dries out enough, we have lots of really sandy soils or sandy loams. So our soils do dry out more quickly than most. If you're on heavy clay, it's kind of a different world. But if your soils are dry enough, if you can get in there in February, it's a great time to get that first pass and accept the fact that it's not perfect, but it at least starts knocking things back. And some people have also gone in with a spray the first time, an organic spray like weed slayer. I was surprised to hear that that was off the market. But just to knock it back, or even suppress will knock it back. Neither one lasts very long, but it does enough to knock it back, because then this mechanical stuff really does a great job of getting at the roots and really creating a more permanent situation. But to answer your question, we try to go in the middle of February during that 3-week dry period, and then we come back again in between rains late March and April. I mean, lately, unfortunately, it's been drying out early and often. It's pretty easy to work around the rains these days. But I like that ability to be able to work in amendments at the same time, work in compost or any other stuff we're trying to do. And our vineyards that have always been without weed herbicides, even organic herbicides, they're actually the easiest to maintain, because sort of a native cover has developed underneath the vines that is low growing to begin with. Many people think that we have sprayed when we haven't, just because we use cover crops, but just the seed bank that's under the vines is definitely different than what we see in vineyards where there's been a lot of Roundup.
Yeah.
Great point with the native cover. How long does that take to develop, and is there a seeding process with the cover crop, or do you wait for the cover crop to seed and then let it spread that way to the berm and then kind of go from there?
Well, we've tried a lot of different things. It depends. I mean, some of the vineyards that have never had herbicides, they're actually the easiest to do. And we didn't really consciously, in one case, we did consciously try to plant something underneath that was a conscious low growing, like fescue type or rose clover. And in the other, we didn't consciously do it, but it's just that continuous management of keeping the weeds out of, keeping the under canopy row clean. It just created the seeds that were left, I suppose, that was sort of a selection process, that if you're constantly taking out the tall grasses and taller weeds, then and you never let them seed because you get them before they ever have a chance to seed, then what's left are the low growing grasses. But in these vineyards I'm referring to, we tend to keep it very clean under the vines all year long. So the low growth I'm referring to is a winter grass, and it's native. It's developed itself over the years. We haven't been successful planting stuff. It hasn't really worked out under the rows. In the vine aisles, it works great, but under the row, I haven't had a lot of luck, just because of the water issue. You can't water to keep it going.
Yeah. So we're running up against our next 15-minute time limit, but I think this is a really fascinating conversation. I'd love to be able to continue it. One thing I'd like to perhaps talk about maybe after the 2 hours is using animals in vineyards. We're got 250 acres right now with sheep in it. It's a conventional vineyard, and they're doing a fantastic job this time of year. And so if anybody wants to stick around and talk about that kind of stuff, be happy to keep it going. So I think
Chris, one thing on the sheep, for those who are interested, we're going to have a field day up in Lodi this winter. It's going to be an in-person field day on using sheep, and we're going to follow all the COVID regulations. So everyone attending will be required to stay 6 feet away from the sheep.
That includes you, John Holmquist. So what transition into vine mealybug, and we can kind of combine organic and conventional in this conversation. So let's since we're on the topic of organic currently, let's talk about what people who are farming organically have been successful with. And for me, it's keep them out using pheromones. Make sure that if you're planting something, you're peeling the wax of the vines, of 1 vine per tray or 2 vines per tray before you actually put them in the ground. If and because we have been delivered for 3 years in a row, vines with mealybug under the wax on new plantings, and I can't tell you how frustrating that is. But those vines have all been sent back to the nursery, so we're start with clean stuff. But start with clean stuff, put out pheromones from day one, and then what are people doing when they have an infestation, or what other things are people doing to keep them at bay in the organic situations? And Larry, you've got maybe 1 or 2 clients who are doing success or having success organically. Maybe you could talk.
Okay, well, it seems to me there aren't very many things you could do. So besides the pheromone, I have the growers release anagyrus. I think it's 5,000 per acre, and they've been getting them from Foothill Ag Research because I believe they have the strain that will attack even small, maybe second instar vine mealybugs. So the growers complain about the cost, but I figure it was their choice to go organic. So they have volunteered to increase their expenses. So I have them do the pheromones, and then I add in the anagyrus.
Just to touch on that cost, what's the per acre
Cost
product?
that application, that like 200 an acre? Or?
The cost of the anagyrus, I don't know. You can ask Foothill Ag Research, but I believe it was 5,000 an acre, 5,000 anagyrus per acre, and I don't know what the cost was, but it was significant because everyone complains about it, and I just tell them, well, it was your choice to go organic, and the pheromone. These people have infestations of vine mealybug, and I believe the pheromone by itself won't do the job.
Go ahead, Devin.
Here's the ant man talking about ants. If you can control the ants in organic, you can get pretty good biocontrol. Lacewings work pretty well if there's no ants. Otherwise, they're just breakfast for the ants. I've been trying some, well, as everybody knows, I like spinosad. Works real well, but unfortunately, it's not on the label to use it as an ant bait. I was trying Bovaria, I forget which brand, and that sometimes works a little bit. Unfortunately, I took another look at the label, and that also it's not labeled for making an ant bait. Venerate has some potential. Takes longer. It takes a couple of weeks. I'd like to try it some more, but also it's not on the label to make it into an ant bait. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of potential for ant baits if we can just persuade the companies and the regulatory agencies to put it on the label that you can make an ant bait. And if you use, for example, powdered eggs and oil, it works on almost every ant. So no matter what if you can find a good AI, and of course, spinosad is the best AI in my opinion.
Hey, Devin, this is Martin. We've been using the boric acid bait, and the Ag Commissioner up here is allowing us to use it. Obviously it's not labeled, but we're able to mix it ourselves and put it out there.
What do you use for the bait that you mix it with?
Sugar.
Okay, so that'll work.
It's mixed with that gel.
Argentine ant and the others.
Have you ever seen that gel that I forget what they call that, but it's like it used to be the old dry water stuff. It's kind of like a gel, so you mix it with that, and then you can put it through a spreader.
Are you talking the one that
polyacrylamide
that they're using on citrus? What's his name from Riverside? Forget his name, but they did
about the polyacrylamide that Monica Cooper's using, the baby diaper absorbent stuff.
John Holmquist, you have a comment?
Yeah, I got a question. Basically, is David Havlin on the program here? And what's going on with what's going on with hydrogels and ant baits in that world?
In the nut world.
No, it's I mean, it's for a lot of different things. It's for sugar loving ants. So, you know, then I think it would really do well in a vineyard situation. And, you know, even I hear some different things around about hydrogels and ant baits and developing these guys.
Yeah, basically that's what we use in organic vineyards is the boric acid ant bait plus the pheromones, which I think have done a really good job. I mean, obviously you're limited in organic vineyards what you can use anyway. And we've released parasites both from Foothill and what's the other one that Wilbur Ellis was involved with. But we haven't really seen, at least I haven't seen any parasitization, excuse me, that was significant. And it's really expensive to release those. So we just basically use pheromones, and we did see some problems, and this is something that everyone should think about if they're pulling out a vineyard and replanting it. We pulled one out and they put a vineyard back in right away, and there were still, I think, vine mealybugs in the roots. And the first year they planted, they came up and they're in the new vines. So it was kind of a chore to spray those out with oil, but it seemed to work just on the ones that were on top. But I'm still fearing there's stuff down in the ground that are going to come up. So it's pretty important to try to get all those roots out. I know it's almost impossible, but.
Martin, which ants were you controlling with the gel and the
Argentine ants.
The Argentine ant? Okay, so you're
Yeah.
further north. You're located up north.
It's in Napa. It's in Napa. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Down here, we're more interested in the field ant and the fire ant and the pavement ant. Those are the main ones.
Okay.
But I suspect that if you mixed boric acid with the eggs and oil, that it would probably work on all those ants. But my understanding is that organic does not allow using boric acid as an insecticide. It's only as a fertilizer. So you can put on fertilizer as long as you're not putting so much on that you're going to hurt your plants.
I think that's how they're getting away with it.
Yeah, exactly. I did quite a bit of work with Solubor. Solubor works really well if you can get the ants to eat it, and that's not too hard. Put it with sugar and so on. And most ants will eat sugar, by the way. You know, it's not true that there's sugar ants and protein ants. There's almost all ants will eat sugar, and all kind of ants would eat some kinds of protein. But you know, yeah, boric acid. It's a lot of potential for ant control.
What kind of levels of control can you expect or find when you have a situation where you've successfully controlled the ants? If anybody can speak to that experience, what level of mealybug reduction can you see and find, and how successful can the ant control be?
Well, it depends on the situation. If you have mature vines with lots of places for mealybugs to hide underneath the vines, underneath the bark, you can get very good control. And here I'm going to have to, you can kind of infer that I've seen growers do some of this, but I had a situation in a raisin vineyard, an old raisin vineyard, where there was a lot of ants, and I would find the mealybugs by looking for the ants. And then the grower controlled the ants. And I went out and I saw a vine with like a dozen or more lacewings just fluttering around the vine. And I said, And I went over and looked, and sure enough, that's where the mealybugs were. And within maybe 4 to 6 weeks, I could not find them. And I could not find them the next year. And that was lacewings, which with the ants, lacewings are almost useless. So it does get very good control. Now on young vines, where the mealybugs, in my opinion, move out faster because they've got no place to hide. So they move out faster. And plus the some of the biocontrol, like the beetles, the mealybug, what is it? The little black mealybug destroyer, the little brown. They like under the bark. So if they don't stay under the bark, if the mealybugs are moving up too fast, then the beetles don't have time to work. And I've never tried it, but I suspect that if you wrapped a rag around each vine or burlap or something to stop the mealybugs and give the beetles a place to do their work, that it would work better. But yeah, young vines, it's really hard to get the biocontrol to work.
Good. Okay. So
I mentioned one more thing. You've probably seen it in my emails. There is a little caterpillar that eats mealybugs, and I'm wondering if anybody else has seen it. I'm calling it the mealybug feeding snout moth because it's similar to other snout moths that eat scale feeding snout moths. So it's about the size of a leaf roller. They're always found under the bark with the mealybugs. And if you look on my webpage, there's a video of one diving around into the eggs of mealybugs. And in places where I see them, I see a moderate level of control with them. Has anybody else seen that? Take a look and see, as it's there. Okay, it's one of the, along with the beetle and the lacewings and the anagyrus, it's one that helps in the biocontrol.
So I'm curious. It looks like we should address one of these topics that's coming up in the chat box. But let me pause on that for a sec. I do want to hear about the gel that you got awarded some money for, David. Do you have a second?
Yeah. Sorry. I got a call just a second ago. I had to take right when you started talking about ants. I had to step out for a couple minutes. Yeah. So Mark Hoddle and Dr. Che, they've been working on these hydrogels for a while, and we know the ants are a big problem, especially with Lorsban gone. That was really in most cases, and at least in the table grapes, that was really our ant product. So the chlorpyrifos alternatives task force ranked this kind of research very, very highly. Of course, I was on that task force with Director Dulcinians, ranked highly. They got 3 different proposals for chlorpyrifos alternatives. Myself, we've got a project where we're looking at trying to develop these gels. I'd be working for field ant in table grapes. We got people doing field ant work in, I'm doing field ant in grapes, table grapes. Kent Dana will be doing Argentine ant in wine grapes. We've got Monique at Riverside doing work with Argentine ants in citrus. And then we've got Sandeepa that'd be working with these gels on fire ants on non-bearing citrus. So we got those 4 angles. Dr. Hoddle also got funded a project that'll be looking more at the citrus system, more in Southern California, especially tied with ACP. And then Dr. Che got a project. I have no idea what his project's about. These projects were all supposed to start in July 1st, but DPR basically, I'm just going to say they screwed up with their first round of RFPs. And so we had to go to a second round. Then these projects all got awarded, but then all the paperwork had to be redone because they changed how the contracts are done. And then the last I heard about 3 weeks ago is that all 3 of these projects are funded, but that they were all sitting at the legal people at DPR, who's, I don't know, apparently there's some kind of concern with all the projects from DPR's legal team. And now all of our contacts are telling us we got to wait until we get some instruction from above on how we're supposed to address this issue. So at this point, we've got $1.5 million of money to solve this over the next 3 years promised, but not a penny to us 5.5 months after the project was supposed to be started. That's our status. Hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll have some progress, and hopefully we get some money someday from this chlorpyrifos alternatives earmarked money.
Thanks, David. So I sort of started off with pheromones, and I'd like to follow up with that. When let's say you're planting a vine in April, the current pheromone that's registered from Zutera will last much of the growing season, but not all the way through. So what I've heard some people doing, at least in mature vineyards, is using the flowable pheromone, and now we're transitioning away from organic strictly to more conventional because flowable is not registered in organic. But using the flowable for the first 2 or 3 vine sprays, and then going out and putting out the pheromone hangers or dispensers. That way you can get it to wrap around the fall season when the biggest flight of males is. Has anybody had success with that? I'm thinking about doing that. It is we can expect that to be another, geez, I don't know, $75 to $100 an acre in cost. But there are situations where I'm applying Movento, Neonix, and a knockdown, and we're still having issues with leaf roll spread or mealybug in the cordons and occasionally in the clusters. And this is in high dollar Napa stuff. So if there's a mealybug in the clusters, some Pinot Noir winemaker is going to strip a bolt, when in reality it's not really causing that much damage. So I'm curious if anybody's had experience with trying to get the pheromone to wrap around a little bit further in the fall by using the technique I described or something else.
Chris, this is Martin. I've actually used the sprayable in organic vineyards, and they've applied for a variance. And I guess it works. I'm assuming they're still organic. And then in conventional vineyards, we've just been spraying it every month, even after the mildew sprays, just putting it on up to harvest almost. So, and that seems to work. So we don't even use the cards or whatever. We just use the sprayable once a month.
And so what happens at harvest and beyond when the biggest flight is in late September, early October?
Well, we're hoping that it's knocked it down far enough that we get through.
Are you checking traps?
No, because with the pheromones, the traps don't work anyway. But the ag commissioner does have traps, and they've been pretty low since we've been using the pheromones.
Keep checking. Put some traps out in like September, and you'll see that pheromone runs out of steam. Unless you've got dispensers out, and you'll start capturing them in the trap again.
So in the table grapes, we've got actual huge adoption of the sprayable product in table grapes, and the variances is true. I know lots of growers, both in California and in Italy, that the certifiers have allowed the sprayable in the organic program. So check with your certifier, on that one. But of course, on the table grapes, we start picking around the 4th of July, and they're harvesting through November. But we've got growers that are doing typically, I'm going to say 2 to 4 sprays. And some growers have the philosophy of use it once a month up until harvest. After that, let the parasitoids do what they're going to do. And then other people are doing, basically $20 a shot application once a month, 4 times. And if they start that around May, that gives them a May, a June, a July, and August. And that August, let's say August 15th application gets them 4 weeks of suppression out to September 15th. So that's pretty darn good. We do have that October flight, but that's become a fairly common program, and I think it'll be an even more common program if any of these neonicotinoid restrictions that have been proposed go into place. There's a certain level of data and logic into those. There's also some insanity in what's being proposed as far as bans on the products. But with dimethoate gone in table grapes, with dimethoate gone, with the lanate gone, with the lorsban gone, and now with the neonics potentially taking a hit, DPR is driving people to really have problems. And it's not just that the Lourdes band controlled mealybugs, it's that it controlled ants. So I think we're going to be forced that everyone's going to have to be doing main disruption, which I don't disagree with. I've done a lot of research with it. I've been very pleased with what the sprayable's done. I've got very mixed reviews on the hangers. And there are other companies that are exploring new vine mealybug products also. It would be a sort of hybrid. It's not a sprayable, but it's not 250 per acre. So, something that might be in that 25 to 50, 100 something that'd make it easier to hang them. But efficacy is still trying to be sorted out on that. Stay tuned.
Sarah, maybe you could speak to the group about the meso dispensers if you want to, Sarah Goldman, and the work you did in our vineyards and others this year, if you're comfortable sharing that information.
So, really call them mesos, they're just dispensers.
Okay, whatever.
Was there a specific question?
Yeah, I just was curious if regarding the efficacy, did you see similar, would you like to share the results from those studies from this last summer?
Oh, no, I don't think so, but actually we didn't see all that many differences. We're trying to make something good out of that data.
Okay.
Pressure's pretty low.
Okay. And since what?
I'd say we've done. I realize it's kind of hard for individual companies. I can kind of take the independent third party because I've tested some of these newer products of several companies, and I'll just say, generally speaking, the best trap shutdown is with the sprayable. There hasn't been any doubt on that for the 4 weeks, but we've seen a sort of density dependence thing where the more point source, particularly with vine mealybug, the more point sources you get, is the better the trap shutdown is. And so, for things like navel orange worm and codling moth, when you're getting down into these puffers or dispensers where there's 1 per acre, it's making a lot of sense. For vine mealybug, when the different companies have tried to get down into that 50 or 25 per acre, there's starting to be a sacrifice on trap shutdown. And so there's potential for these newer products, Sarah's and others included. It's just finding that right balance between how good a shutdown do you get versus, ideally you'd hang 3,000 hangers per acre, right? Where do they draw that line between practical and efficacious? And that's being sorted out. And it's hard in these vineyards, especially with us in table grapes, because we figured some of our trials have $10 million in grapes in them. We cannot get a grower to give us an untreated check. So we're literally trying a full spray program with and without main disruption. So we get great data on trap shutdown, but when it comes down to actual asking the question of, is there a difference in damage? All the plots have low damage because we just can't cause millions of dollars of trial damage. So it's hard for Sarah and others to really get to that, are you reducing damage question, just because the nature of the trials on large scale.
Well, and I think we've come to the point where the mealybug is manageable as a mealybug pest, as a pest that causes damage, but we're controlling a vector, and so many people want that number to be 0 or so small that you're not seeing a large amount of vectoring from the mealybug, and that's just impossible to get to. Because everybody has different spray programs. We've got native grapes out there. We've got abandoned grapes. It's inefficiencies in our irrigation system, inefficiencies in our sprayers. We're never going to get to 0 unless we farm in Nevada or something. And so, unfortunately, we've got to this point where we're no longer farming it as a pet or managing it as a pest. We're managing it as a vector, and that takes a different level of management.
Yeah, you're managing to the level of a vector. It's the same as the table grape growers managing to a level of 0 tolerance, because even one cluster with a mealybug in Australia is essentially your threshold. So we're kind of on the same page for 2 different reasons.
Right. Monty, you mentioned I think you mentioned this yesterday in the tree crop. I haven't heard about Senstar, so why don't you just tell us for 2 minutes, if you don't mind, I'm not familiar with the other product in that. Obviously,
Okay, it's if those are familiar with C's for San Jose scale and almonds and nuts, Esteem and berries, strawberries on the coast, Esteem 0.86 for red scale and citrus. That's the other half of the product, and the other half is the Movento molecule. We have a label. It has a federal registration. We're expecting California March 1st, but the way things have been going with COVID, we and they make no promises. I mean, I was trying to get my driver's license, for God's sakes, and I've been on the phone with DMV for a month because they're closed. It looks good. I know it's an odd combination, and I was a little pessimistic, but I've looked at it in grapes, and everywhere we put it, and we put it in some pretty tough situations in Wheeler Ridge and Mettler, it cleaned up all the vine mealy bug, and I couldn't find a live ant. But I'm not sure if that was because of the Senstar. In red scale, it worked. It was late. We didn't get it out till July. So we already had some Movento on in the bloom spray in May. But in grapes, so far so good. And we've got, I think we have it in the hands of Parlier now. We missed a year with them, but we're going to have a registration. We expect either March 1 or April 1. I will caution those that do use it and try it. If they are using Movento at the 8-ounce rate, you're good at the high rate of the Senstar. But if you go over the 8, you have to lower the next application of the Senstar to match the 12.5-ounce rate of Movento. In citrus, though, I think you can go both. It's a max of 20 ounces per acre per season. So we have to abide by that. It's just a new tool. I think it'll be something especially handy for the table grape guys that get in trouble, especially with David saying the neonicotinoids are in tough shape right now. The DPR wants to eliminate all but one application of all of them: clothianidin, dinutefuran, imidacloprid, acetameta, whatever it's called, all that category, to one application. So if you use one of any of them, you're done. That isn't final yet, but they typically get their way. So,
Hey, Monty, let me make one clarification because I was actually really confused on this. The neonicotinoid potential ban restrictions do not include a sale.
okay, all right, my
Right?
bad.
So it's imidacloprid,
It's all
dinotefuran,
the
clothianidin, and
neos, but
thimethoxam,
is that
but
right?
not acetamiprid.
But it's all the neos except for which one?
Acetamiprid, which is a sale.
Okay, but that is in the neo class.
It is. It's a neonicotinoid, but there's some molecular differences between the 4 active ingredients that I just mentioned compared to a sale. And so yes, there's a ban. There would be a ban on 2 neonicotinoids, but a grower could still put on something like Admire during May and then come back within a sale a month or 2 later.
Okay.
I didn't think that was possible, but it is. So that's worth clarifying.
And it doesn't affect the nichino product at all, right? What do you call it? Apollo, not Apollo.
Applaud.
Yeah, the one used early on the early N stars.
Oh, so that particular product is not a neonicotinoid. That's not involved.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just a comment on your product. I recognize the citrus angle on the combination. I'm curious to know what pyriproxifen's offering in a grape system that would justify adding it to a Movento.
I totally agree with your comment.
Okay.
We just don't know yet, but just from the initial sighting of it, it looks good. I don't know if it's because of the combination or the Movento's doing all the work. I don't know yet, but
fair enough.
Hey, it's something new, guys. I mean, that's pretty hard to get anything new in this state. I mean, it's 200 million to come up with something.
Chris, I'd like to go back to your comment about the vine mealybug transmitting diseases. First of all, in the chat, someone asked about the Lodi virus workbook. This you can get this book for free because it was funded by the American Vineyard Foundation from the Lodi Wine Grape Commission. If you contact Stephanie, she'll mail you the book. Oh, I think they charge $5 or $10 for shipping, but other than that, it's free. But back on the mealybug vectoring a virus, I only learned in the last week that the vine mealybug vectors another virus besides leaf roll virus. Did everybody else already know that? Did you already know that, Chris?
The vitiviruses?
Exactly. It also vectors the vitiviruses. So Akif Escalon is going to have a presentation in this conference. It's a recorded session about the sudden vine collapse, but sudden vine decline, I think they call it, or sudden vine collapse. And his theory is that it's caused by a combination of the leaf roll virus and the vitivirus. And I believe I already saw his presentation because it was also on one of the Malcolm Media expos. But in his presentation, he makes the point that the vine mealybug has been spreading this sudden vine decline. And the sudden vine decline has really taken off in Lodi. It's very widespread. It's so much easier to diagnose than leaf roll or red blotch because the vine dies on you and a whole patch of vines die. So we've got the vine mealybug not only spreading leaf roll, but spreading this sudden vine decline.
Yeah, and it seems to be brought on the combination of those two plus some sort of abiotic stressor, which typically happens right around ripening. So you have those two, that you have a compromised vine that goes through either a heat event or the process of ripening and all the stress that goes into the, the energy to ripen the fruit. Vines just collapse. And like Larry said, they collapse in kind of a patchy pattern that seems to start at a point and sort of extend outward from that point, almost looking like it's soil-borne. But if you think about how a mealybug spreads and how viruses spread from a mealybug, it's slow and methodic in an outward sort of trajectory from the main infection point. So I could see how that it starts patchy and then it kind of consumes the rest of it. And there's really nothing you can do once I don't even think keeping the vines really happy and healthy, knowing they have two diseases, is going to be enough. They'll eventually collapse, and it's bulldozer time. Has anybody else experiencing this?
Why do you suppose it's mostly on Freedom rootstock? Seems like
Freedom
that's
and Harmony are super susceptible to leaf roll, as far as I understand it. Maybe David, you could step in there, or somebody else who knows better. But it seems like those are I have two theories there. They've been around forever. They were planted, ubiquitously in the 90s. So we're coming up on 20 to 25 years to 30 years. So they're all infected with leaf roll, but they're also very susceptible. Those Harmony and Freedom are very susceptible to viruses, to red leaf viruses.
Bill's encouraging everybody to see the session, and I would say that I learned a lot about it. Besides the fact that the mealybug transmits the vitivirus, Akif says that what happens is then the vine, there's a graft union incompatibility, and the vine can't send carbohydrates down to the roots. The roots aren't getting carbohydrates, and then wood canker kills the root stock. So you've got the leaf roll virus and the vitivirus, and then you've got the wood canker, you've got the graft union incompatibility, and you've got the vine mealybug. So the vine doesn't stand a chance.
Find that same pattern in other areas of Lodi where we see the vine decline or sudden vine collapse, and that is definitely related to the root system when we dig up the vines, or one case spray the root zone out, try to hydraulically wash all the dirt away to see the root zone. There's almost no root zone left. So that's definitely a pattern, and that's, I think, somewhat related to alluvial layers in the soil profile and silt layers where there's a change in soil type and probably inhibiting water transmission in some way, or bulk flow of water through those different soil types to the root zone. On the same topic of the viral vectoring, is anyone using products that exclude feeding, like a kaolin clay or the diatomaceous earth or stylet oils, soaps, anything like that? Maybe we're all done with mealybug for now.
Well, I will say that the neonics inhibit feeding. I think it's after 15 minutes of feeding on a vine with neonics, and it takes at least an hour to transmit the disease. I might have leaf roll and PD confused, but I think there's some sort of time frame in which the disease has, the insect has to be sucking for it to actually transmit the disease. And that's a longer time frame than it takes for them to stop feeding because of the the neonic.
I think that's PD.
That's PD. Okay, thanks.
And I think, and that's a case where, of course, you've got an insect feeding on a vine that's got wings that immediately flies to another vine to transmit. That's a little different than a mealybug transmitted disease.
Yeah. Is there anything else that somebody wants to bring up regarding vine mealybug? Grape. There was a grape mealybug question earlier. I guess I'll repeat that from.
I had just kind of a stupid question. Those that are the vine mealybug experts, are there always ants present? Because some of the trials I did, I couldn't find them prior to application. I was just curious. I know Coachella's big in different parts of the state, but is that always true, or is it just most of the time?
I would say it's not always true, but it's most of the time.
Agreed.
Yep.
And by the way, Monty, just so you know, as you work around the state, Coachella's pretty much all field ant. Formica, I can't remember the species down there. Southern San Joaquin Valley is usually field ant. As you get into farther and farther north San Joaquin Valley, you get more and more Argentine ant, and then North Coast is almost all Argentine ant. At least that's my understanding. Any of you want to can correct me, but there is an absolute gradient from south to north and to the coast in those species.
And with that said, they're mostly sugar feeding, but do they switch back to protein in season sometimes? Or is it always a sugar feeding ant? Because we have this sugar label on all these different ant baits. I don't know if it helps a lot.
They are all first and foremost sugar feeders. If you give them the option, they will go for the sugar. And mealybug honeydew is perfect for them. But absolutely, if you get a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and you toss your bone by an Argentine ant colony, you bet they'll devour the meat on that. So, yes, they will eat meat. In the case of the Formica aerata, the field ant, that's actually the same species that in the winter will eat peach twig borer out of the hibernacula in almonds. So yes, it will feed on protein when it has to. At the same time, if you put out your clinch, esteem, C's, all these formulated for fire ant protein-based baits, no, these two species don't really go for those.
That's not true, because they both like the eggs very much. You mix eggs with oil and you can get almost any ant. The only one that I've had trouble with is the pyramid ant, which is not a really terrible problem in ants. So if you get the right protein, they'll go for it.
Okay. Then my point stands corrected. If we clarify that the proteins they're using in those baits are not as good as the protein you're doing with your egg whites. Is that fair?
Exactly. It's not egg whites. It's whole egg.
Whole egg. Okay.
But the other thing I want to say is there's a couple other ants. The pavement ant is a pretty big problem in Madera County, Fresno County, and Kings County. I have not seen them down in southern Tulare County or Kern County very much. You might mistake it for an Argentine ant, but it's bigger and looks black from a distance. Also, there's a new ant that has entered the valley in maybe the last 10 years or so or less. It's called the dark rover ant. Very, very tiny. And I'm not real clear on how much is a problem with protecting mealybugs. I do know that in my backyard, I have an orange tree that has only these kind of ants on it. And I've had a big breakout of citrus whitefly. I'm not sure that it's a correlation, but it sure looks like it to me. So watch out for little tiny black ants. They're called dark rover ants. And I've seen
On
them
the
on
topic
grapes.
of the topic of ant control, does anyone those of us who've seen a mealybug infestation that is has no ants present, was there a pattern with floor control or the cultural control on the floor management of the vineyard? The case where I've seen no ants present with mealybug present was a case where there was resident vegetation wall to wall. Does anybody else have input on the floor management practices?
No till, I agree.
And I've seen it post Lore's ban.
Larry, one of your growers has a wall-to-wall, probably chin high at the end of the season, and I seem to think he's got pretty good predators and parasitoids in there. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. We have no problem. We have no problem there with the vine mealybug as far as a pest on fruit or leaves. I mean, there's probably enough. I'm sure there's enough to transmit disease, but with his row, he's got 100% of the vineyard floor covered, and he has complete biological control of the vine mealybug. Complete for pest purposes, not for disease transmission purposes.
A good segue into another topic where we discuss vertebrate pest management in vineyards. Looking at from some experiences in the Delta Islands, wall-to-wall cover crop or forage species, weeds, clover, other things like that. You have some vole issues or gopher issues. Do those issues come up with wall-to-wall resident vegetation at all?
Definitely.
What would be what are the control methods used for the voles or gophers or potentially ground squirrels or even?
Remove the cover crop, disc the field up and remove the cover.
Yeah, and or flood the field if you have that capability. Flood the entire thing, make it a lake for a week or so. Kind of does the same thing as what Larry's saying.
Well, I had a grower with a beautiful permanent sod cover they'd had for about 15 years. And one year at harvest, they got a complaint that the gondolas with the grapes, when they arrived at the winery, there were so many voles or meadow mice in the gondolas that the winery was very unhappy. So we disked up the beautiful sod cover crop. I guess the other alternative would be to try and poison them somehow, but it just seemed like it was better to modify the habitat.
Definitely agree with that habitat modification practice. Is there a typical annual time frame that the vertebrate pests become an issue that anyone sees where you have resident vegetation and then over a certain amount of time at year number X, you have to do a cultural practice like cultivation or disking or ripping? John, was that your hand?
Yeah, David, I wanted to ask Larry a question in regards to the voles. Now, I've lost almond trees to vole girdling.
Yes.
But I never lost any grapevines. I never really had a lot of voles in grapevines. Did you lose any vines?
They'll kill grapevines.
I figured, but I wanted to ask.
When they start killing the grapevines, it's time to disc up the cover crop.
Have a clover and vetch cover crop mix in the Delta, and there's not a lot of, you notice a lot of hawks flying around and this kind of thing, then it might be time to go. Chris, you might be
They,
able to say more about it.
yeah, Dave and I had a sobering experience where voles took out, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 acres. I mean, completely killed the vines on a 300-acre ranch. They in the winter, it was very dry winter. Was it maybe 2014 or 15? I can't remember, but one of those very dry where a lot of the resident vegetation hadn't been growing, and they just went right underneath the vine and girdled it at the soil line. And come out in the spring, and you had growth about an inch because there was no roots left, and they all collapsed. So that took a lot of bait and habitat modification. We sort of freaked out and threw everything at them. Since then, I've had big issues over in the coast in Carneros. Maybe 2 years ago, the voles and a new planting, they'll get into the carton and make that their little home, especially if you have kept everything very free of vegetation and maybe put down a lot of straw for erosion control. The voles will hang out in that straw, but then need something to feed on, and they'll move into the carton if you haven't buried the carton below the soil line, and that'll be a nice little clean, safe, warm spot for them and to raise a family, and they'll just eat all of they'll girdle your young vines. And we lost, another 25% of a vineyard that way. Luckily, we didn't lose that many, they weren't mature vines. It still was costly, but that was another eye-opening experience. So during the winter, in some of these areas, if they're not buried, we'll take the cartons off and before we would want to. And now we're opening ourselves up to susceptibility to weed spray damage. So it's a tricky situation. Roger Baldwin Baldwin, I can't remember his last name, but he's the vertebrate specialist. Gave a talk the other day at the pistachio short course that David also gave a talk in, and he was saying voles are very cyclical. So 5-6 years they'll not be in existence, then 1 year they kind of take off and they're bad for 2 or 3 years, and then they sort of go away again. And it's hard to explain what is causing that. And in our situations, the Delta was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Carneros was 2 years ago. So it doesn't seem to be, maybe it's cyclical in one region or per region rather than across the state.
Voles have very high reproductive rates. So anything with a high reproductive rate, it's kind of like insects where they can do these big cycles in and out from year to year.
Before we move off the vertebrate topic, maybe we could talk about birds. Is anybody having success with any of the bird laser or the bird guard, the sound stuff, or netting? Maybe Martin, you could talk about your experience over in the high dollar region.
Well, the best is netting, most expensive too, but usually if we do netting, it's just, kind of halfway up into the fruit zone, and then instead of taking it all the way down, we just kind of tie it up on the drip hose. So it kind of saves a little bit of money on removal and installation. I have had some experience with the lasers and the new noisemakers, and I don't know, I think they work better than the Zon guns, but only marginally, I think. I don't know. Maybe the laser works a little better, and the new noisemakers seem like they can work for maybe 10 acres or something like that, but I think the birds even get used to that after a while. But it seems like originally they do work for a little bit. But other than that, I not much help with birds other than netting.
Chris, are you attending the Sustainable Ag Expo?
Yep.
There's a presentation there for anybody who's attending it by a researcher in Australia using a drone to scare birds out of the vineyard. And the drone does two things. It makes a bird distress call, and it has a dead bird upside down on it. And as it flies towards the flock of birds, they see a dead bird and bird distress sounds, and they fly away from it.
That sounds very offy. Is it a real bird? Dead bird?
Yes, it's a real dead bird. You have to supply the dead bird.
Huh.
Well, I
Okay.
can't,
Vectoring risk with that, maybe perhaps vectoring risk.
I've used the noisemakers and the netting, of course. Tying it on the drip line does reduce a lot of cost in installation. It doesn't really wear down the net. We've used the noisemakers. They've been pretty successful, but I agree that people get used to them. We use kites. I don't know if anybody else has done that, but they have these kites. They're only about $16 or $20 a piece. And you tie them to a 20 or 30-foot pole that you install in the vineyard. The biggest problem that they have is sometimes they get wrapped up in the pole, but those are also another kind of temporary. You got to, everything you do with birds that isn't netting, I feel like you have to move around. The drone sounds pretty interesting, but I guess that means you have to hire somebody every morning and every night to fly the drone. I do like the kites, and on smaller acreages, the little 2 to 10 acre vineyards, we've had efficacy with that. They look like eagles or red-tailed hawks.
Yeah, we've tried the bird guard specifically, and when it worked very well in one situation and it pretty much failed in another situation. And I know it worked well in one situation because where it was a new vineyard, or it's a vineyard that we've had classic bird symptoms. You know, they're coming in from the edges and you lose 3, 4, 5 rows of fruit. Where we put the bird guard up, fruit was still there. We had a young vineyard that was growing up, and we didn't put the bird guard out there because we weren't expecting a whole lot of crop, and that thing was empty of fruit. So we knew in that situation, and then we put it into another vineyard, hoping to see the same kind of efficacy, and the birds just sort of seemed to get used to it. And then we tried to change the bird calls. There's a lot of different downloads you can do with these things. Different scary dying bird sounds, and the birds would react for maybe a week, but then they'd be back in. And like in that situation, we need to combine it maybe with the dead drone or the hawk on the kites or whatever. Just lots of different scenarios out there to keep those birds scared. The other issue is it's right next to a feedlot or a dairy, so it's like we're in the worst possible situation with Pinot Noir. Make it even worse with Pinot Noir. Does anybody have any other vertebrate pest issues that they want to mention? We can move off this topic with the last half an hour. I'm willing to let somebody come up with another topic. We have a whole list of things, but if somebody's got a burning desire to bring something up, put it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep rolling through our list. I don't see any green mics going on, so.
Are you talking diseases, or is this an entomology session?
Anything. Oh, we could talk diseases, absolutely.
I was gonna say, I'm an entomologist, and I'm shocked I haven't heard the words mildew and sour rot yet. So.
I just put sour rot in the chat.
Okay.
And Monty put rot and smoke. So why don't we address rot and then we can address smoke. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, sour rot is a big problem in Lodi and Zinfandel. And when I used to work down in Fresno and Reedley, sour rot was a bigger problem than botrytis because of the high temperatures. So Megan Hall, I believe is her name, Megan Hall, who used to be at Cornell and now she's at Missouri. She did a webinar this summer through the American Society of Enology and Viticulture. She's been testing, putting on an insecticide for vinegar flies and an antimicrobial. And so for a couple of years, this is what she was talking about, putting on an insecticide and an antimicrobial. But this year she said the insecticide is much more important than the antimicrobial. She did some experiments where she would do just one or the other. And if she did just the antimicrobial, it didn't make that much difference. But when she did just the insecticide, it made a difference. So I've been using Success, I believe. for the vinegar fly. But prior to her research, I always thought, well, the vinegar just fly, it just comes in after the fact, and you can't really control it or anything. But she says the vinegar fly is really the key that is spreading the sour rot. John Holmquist, did you have your hand up on that?
Larry, you know what? That's the most bullshit I ever heard. Okay, and I'm going to qualify that by saying the biggest thing that a guy can do to stop sour rot is not over irrigating and breaking the berries in the cluster. And I mean, you know, we did that with thousands of acres of Zinfandel down here in Fresno and Madera County. And that's, in my opinion, the biggest issue is guys blow the clusters up by using too much water.
Oh, John, the number one vineyard I have where the grower is most concerned about sour rot is never irrigated, never.
Well, hell, where's he get his water?
The vines are 100 years old, and I guess the roots are deep enough they're getting water somewhere, but he doesn't irrigate it.
Yeah, well, that's not been, maybe in Lodi and that vineyard, that's not been my experience over many years and lots of acres. And not just Zinfandel. Chenin Blanc is another really good one to rot.
So almost the same pattern where we've had Zinfandel where 16 to 20 hours of irrigation put on the specific area next to a creek with high vigor in Zinfandel. And, you know, but that's not very much water for the season, maybe 2 or 3 individual irrigation events, and pretty bad sour rot in that area, that particular zone. So what about the fly species? So is it vinegar fly? Are there fruit flies also causing an issue, or is it just the vinegar fly that's predominantly?
Just Drosophila.
I'll back up Larry on the Drosophila control. We've had some blocks that had very, very severe sour rot, and we treated with, I forget what, delegate or something. And I'm not out in the field anymore, but my understanding was that it made a difference. I don't know, maybe Scott Lacrone or Rob Weaver can address that. Have you guys had experience with using Drosophila control for rot, sour rot? Rob must be. Go ahead, Scott.
I have recommended that it be carried out, but I don't know if the grower actually used it.
I know, I think it was John White that was using it the most. I wish he was here to address that, but it's my understanding from talking to John that it was pretty noticeable difference. If you control the Drosophila, it makes a big difference.
Larry, are you using JIP to open up those clusters at all?
Yes, definitely top of the label.
Okay, top of the label, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Normally I don't, but this grower, the whole reason he hired me was because he had a sour rot problem. So I started out going, I believe.
Herself and she's been in the committee.
I believe the label is 2 to 4 grams. So I started out going, if that's correct, I started out going the 2 grams like I do with most Zinfandel growers, but the grower wanted more. He wanted that as loose as he could get it. Anyway, the bottom line was this year he had no sour rot. No problem.
Because you were applying the mite or the fly material.
Well, we did the fly material, we did the top of the label jib, and there was some strange leaf pulling thing he did at some certain time, which he had read would loosen up the cluster also. So it was a very extreme leaf pulling, too extreme, I thought, but everything together, I've been working with him for a few years, but this year finally we didn't have a sour rot problem.
So Larry, Sour rot is a secondary infection, right? You have to have something that breaks the skin.
Yeah, we have birds.
Birds or mildew or tight clusters from over irrigation or access to deep water. One thing that I noticed this year, or that I experienced this year, is that we had very low mildew pressure across the North State. I think I sprayed where I washed what I'll call or tried to wash 3 vineyard blocks out of 12,000 acres. So that to me is a successful year. In a typical year, an average washing probably, or trying to wash, it's never very successful, probably 10 vineyards or more. And we're battling mildew all season long in a number of blocks. This year, it was just really, really easy outside of maybe 1 or 2 blocks. So I think the fact that mildew was low across the region meant that you had a lot less secondary infection or potential for secondary infection out there. Does anybody else have that same? Did anybody else have that same experience?
I have a couple of questions for the group since we're at a standstill here. One is, if you control the rot, don't you not control the vinegar flow?
I
How
have
would you
this area.
how would you
I
control
have
the
this.
rot?
How's
I
that?
mean, I went out on a few vineyards, and it was as though they didn't get a hold of the rot, whether you call it sour rot or not. And then the vinegar fly came in. There was no stopping it. But I'm going to throw the creek out here. This creek fire and the smoke trailer, there just seemed to be a pattern where there's tremendous rot, and I've never seen it come in with a vengeance like it did this year. I'm talking mainly table grapes. And I concur with the other, I think it was Mr. White said that wherever we put heavy stretch sprays on, especially in wine grapes, we didn't have near the problem in the rot. But a lot of it was out of label, which is fine. But if you use jib right, I think you really assist in controlling the rot.
Well, that's interesting about the stress, because I agree. I saw a lot of really strange responses post fire, post smoke. It seemed like people that had mildew issues, those issues became 10 times, 1,000 times worse. I'm not sure if it had to do with the sun not being available and being basically blotted out or shut out for weeks on end, and yet it would be very, very hot and humid and muggy, just very unusual conditions. But the sour rot thing, it confuses me, because where I see it in the few vineyards I know that have it, it's always in the same place. It always comes from the same vines. I wonder if the flies have established a population there, if anybody knows anything from that side of it, because it's not a highly watered area. But if we have sour rot, it's always in the same spot.
No. Okay. I don't see anybody with an answer to Prudy. So we can transition to talking a little bit more about the smoke. I think that would be interesting. I'll say that there's an estimate out there that about 50% of California's Pinot Noir did not get picked this year. I know we didn't pick close to 700 acres up in Sonoma County alone, and then probably another 300 to 500 acres in southern or in Carneros and Napa that did not get picked. And that's that's just one company. So that was mainly because of smoke exposure, perceived smoke taint, whatever you want to call it. And for that reason, maybe for that reason we didn't have we just sort of walked away from those vines. We knew they weren't going to get picked, and I'm wondering if we're going to see issues next year. I kind of don't think so, but you know, we weren't really watching the mildew later in the summer, basically from August on, and we weren't really watching the sour rot because we knew those things weren't going to get picked.
Chris, is Martin. My experience is that smoke doesn't usually carry through to the next year based on having Pinot Noir in 08 that got hit pretty hard with smoke and it didn't carry through. But I think you're right about North Coast, and Pinot was probably hit the hardest, especially Sonoma County. And a lot of the stuff that got picked is now they're seeing that it's in the wine. So you know, I think you did the right thing, or of course you probably had to not pick it. But I think cabs, we're seeing the same thing in Cab and Napa, where a lot of it didn't get picked, and the stuff that did looks like it's got something. So not a good year for smoke all the way around. I don't know anywhere in the state where it was good, but certainly it was really bad up here.
Yeah. Does anybody have another experience with the smoke? Did you see, it sounded like, Prudy, you had some odd growth patterns, and Monty, you were seeing lots more rot. Anybody else have another experience with the smoke?
I wanted to be specific on the smoke. I'm not saying it changed or altered the taste of the wine or et cetera. I just thought it created a different climate that created a lot more challenges for vineyards. It was unusual, the amount of raw. You could smell it miles away when you pulled in the vineyard. I don't think it helps. A lot of these table grapes are on these really aggressive trellis systems from South Africa and other areas that are condensed, picking a lot of fruit. But that combined with the atmosphere change from the smoke, I think, is what we probably won't see it again for a while. But Creek Fire burned just short of 400,000 acres, and it just happened to occur right as the late fall season table grapes are getting ready to come off. That was just my point. Anyone else seen it? It just seemed unusual.
Carla was mentioning yesterday that the humidity was really up in the South San Joaquin Valley. Was that because of the fire?
Say it again.
Carla yesterday kept saying how humid it was this summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
The fire created this climate. It was really humid. It was like Georgia. There were days where, it was 90, 95 degrees. Humidity was, I don't know, 50, 70% for Southern San Joaquin Valley. That's really odd. So it mainly affected the table grape business. I know Franzia had a problem down there. I mean, they have a lot of grapes down there, but I don't know how much it affected the wine down there.
So there was a question. I don't know if we got to. Somebody wanted us to talk about mildew. Did you get enough out of the conversation? Let's see. Can't even read your name. It's so tiny.
Gioti Taneja.
Thank you. I'm on a tiny screen. Gioti, did you have a specific question?
Yeah, I am a researcher at UC Berkeley. I work on powdery mildew, so I just wanted to know learn more about the experiences in the real field and how was the season this year. And I heard that
pedestal right now. They're expecting a lot from her, and so she's gonna give it because he knows what the expectation.
So you had a good mildew season this year, so that was good.
Well, I'm one grower. I don't know, Larry or Dave or somebody else, maybe in the South Valley or Martin, did you guys have different experiences?
I had 10 acres of Chardonnay with excessive mildew this year. And in order to get it harvested, they had to go in and cut out the mildew and drop it on the ground, that's the next to the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is if they don't harvest it. But I had it on 10 acres. Everything else was fine. In fact, I didn't have it anywhere else. So the only thing that tells me is it's not like there was a light mildew year or no mildew. I mean, if you did something wrong, you still got mildew. I'm not quite sure what they did wrong, to tell you the truth. I know how to fix it, but I'm not quite sure. Just 1 10 acres block of Chardonnay had bad mildew. Everything else was fine.
Which region was that?
That's Lodi Chardonnay. So what I'll do, I'll put on lime sulfur in the winter, and then I'll put on Raleigh and Thompson delayed dormant after pruning, and then we'll go in with sulfur at bud break and go sulfur every 7 days. And if I have bad mildew 1 year and I do that, the next year I don't have a problem. It can be cleaned up in 1 year, but for some reason I did have 10 acres with bad mildew.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I
if you
think
don't
it was in Napa, it was a pretty light year. I think probably because the year before was so bad that everyone went in this year and just hit it pretty hard. And a lot more sulfur was used. We had kind of been backing off a little bit on dusting sulfur, but we used a lot more this year, and I think that really helped.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we worked with ACIF this year, and we were doing some testing, and even in control plants where we didn't spray anything, we didn't see any mildew. It was in Sacramento area.
If you don't like lime sulfur, which I don't really care to use it, combine like 2% oil, maybe even up to 3% oil with some micronized sulfur as a dormant season application, and you can pretty much wipe out those Chlysosthesia. You know, in 150 to 200 gallons of water, focused on the wood. I would never recommend that in season. You'll melt your leaves, but it does work. Okay.
Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you like lime sulfur? Could you explain that?
You have to go at a really, really high rate. It smells like rotten eggs, and it's terrible on equipment and people. It also kills. It's also really toxic to nesting birds, which I know there's not a lot of during the winter, but I like quail, and they're in the winter.
I've never
Okay,
heard
good
of
reason. Thank
anyone.
you.
I've never heard of anyone combining. I think you're talking about stylet oil, or I guess it doesn't matter what kind of oil. Stylet oil and sulfur, of course, is a huge no-no. But I guess as a dormant application, it makes sense that it wouldn't matter. It doesn't affect the buds. Is there a time where you don't do that, like at bud swell?
We have done it at bud swell, and there's just no problem in my experience. We're in the Lodi area and the North Coast, and we applied it last year at that timing at bud swell, not woolly bud, but just there's no green tissue out there basically. And yeah, it really cleans it up. And I got that from I didn't come up with this idea. I got it from Doug Snide, a PCA up in the North Coast. After the 2017 season, because a lot of people had mildew basically across the state in 2017 after that real wet year. And we used that in a number of places, and the following year, it seemed to just do what Larry's program does, and it's not as to the people performing the application and miserable to the people performing the application.
I'll try that, Chris. Could you write me the recommendation?
It does. It sounds like a great alternative to lime sulfur. It does.
Yeah. All right, so we've got 10 minutes left. Dave, you had you were questioning about leaf folder. Did you want to flesh that topic out
Sure. Yeah, some experience with leaf folder larvae on Cabernet this year, east of Lodi. Just wanted to get some feedback and info from the group on what the patterns are and how to kind of. I know it seems like a sporadic pest. It comes up 1 year or 2 years in a row, and then from then on, you kind of don't get any activity for a while. It might pop up again a couple years later. So what are the thresholds for treatment people are using, or what are the products? If it's organic, what are the options that you have? We did end up treating one individual vineyard block with conventional pesticide for the leaf folders, which was solved the problem, was enough. What are the other experiences with leaf folder? How often is it coming up in the same blocks? Is it the same areas where it recurs? And what's the other feedback?
David, I wonder, what other pesticides did you spray in that block that year? Pesticides or miticides? Anything else prior to the leaf folder?
Just the mildew control programs, sulfur dust only.
Okay, nothing for mites or insects.
No, not in that block. No.
Leaf folder is very sporadic. Yeah, it's very sporadic. It shows up every now and then. Most people, by the time they see it, I mean, traditionally down here, it stays in the leaves. It doesn't really go to the fruit. So, it's not like leaf roller that will really hammer the fruit. And so, the leaf folder for the most part just makes those rolls in the leaves. And a lot of times by the time that people notice it, those leaves are all rolled up. It's hard to do anything to actually kill a leaf roller or leaf folder that's already rolled up in a leaf. And then sometimes people confuse it with omnivorous leaf roller. And I've seen people put out pheromone traps for omnivorous leaf roller, use the degree day timings, and spray for leaf folder based on the leaf roller pheromone traps, completely miss their timing, and then call the chemical company out there saying, why did your product fail? And then you get there and realize that it's two different pests. But biocontrol is typically really good on it. I don't know why it shows up every now and then, but yes, very sporadic, at least down in our neck of the woods.
Comment here with the BT option. Is there certain products that I have relatively limited experience with BT products? Is there sulfur dust application with the BT included where that's effective, or is it another? I see the BT dipel. I've not used that before. Monty, was that a comment?
That should be effective if you've got. That should be effective if you've got eggs and small larvae that are exposed. Of course, it's not going to touch a larger larvae in a roll.
It depends on the leb species. Roller and folder are pretty easy to kill with dipel. Skeletonizer, yeah, older instars are more difficult, but you got to have the deposit. You have to have really good coverage with that, as well as any product like that. But it's been around a long time, and it's used religiously with a lot of people as a maintenance spray. They'll put it on without a worm out there, just to keep it out there. It's relatively inexpensive, but it's a certain amount of maintenance. You guys on the call, that's where you guys are the key to using it and when to use it. It's not for the meek, though. It's not like kelthane or parathion where you can close your eyes and spray and walk away all year long. You have to keep at it. But David's right, though. The worms in a lot of parts of the valley have disappeared. They come and go.
Might that be because we no longer use dimethylate in the vineyard?
Say it again. I'm sorry.
Might that not be because we don't use dimethylate in our vineyards anymore? I mean, it seems to me since dimethylate went away, so did all the leaf folder and OLR issues. And
Very
then,
true.
with bug aids, away went.
In the olden days, the BT cut its teeth with table grape guys before Lannay came out, and they would put it in every jib spray. And that's where we learned a lot on how to use it. And from there, it's expanded, still around. We have the other strain of Zawi. It's primarily for diamondback and sugar beet armyworm, but the Christaki strain is still very effective on these other LEP species, especially like the citrus caterpillar, alfalfa cat. You can use 1/8 of a pound, it'll fry it. But roller and folder, you got to use a higher rate. I would, at least. Unless you're a maintenance spray, then you could go a 1/2 pound.
Hey, David, I'm curious, when you had your leaf folder build up, did you unroll them and look for parasitism, and what did you find?
Didn't find too many mummies. Most of the blocks where we did have activity, the roll was empty. The leaf was not present. Just the remains and the frass and whatnot was there. They were gone already. Just the one block was a treatment situation, not defoliated by any means, but getting to the point where most vines had a noticeable population building. Pretty random distribution throughout the field, and yeah, just 3 or 4 fields were affected, different individual blocks. One of which we felt was treatment worthy, not defoliated by any means, but didn't want to take the chance with a later hanging machine pruned Cabernet block. So that was the justification there.
Yeah, sounds like the typical story of a pest that sometimes as an anomaly shows up.
Hello, everybody. I just muted everybody. We are going to be closing out the recorded session now. If you'd like to stay in the room and chat, you're more than welcome to. Please remember that after you finish up here to go take the test in the same place where you logged in, right underneath is the quiz. And you just finish that, the certificate will send to you automatically. Thank you, David, Chris, and Larry for helping. It was a wonderful session. Thank you all for participating. Please go in and check out all the pre-recorded sessions that we have online. Those all have CE units attached to them. So enjoy. If any of you would like, we have a cannabis session tomorrow at 9 a.m. The recorded session will end now.